Please be advised, this episode does have content that some may find distressing. As always, listener discretion is advised and it is not suitable for anyone under the age of 13.
Hello and welcome to episode 39 of It's Murder Up North. So for today's episode, I wanted to do something a little more uplifting, especially with all the craziness in the world right now. I decided to choose an episode with somewhat of a happy ending, so I sincerely hope you enjoy it. My podcast of the week comes from the lovely Mary and Vanessa with their show True Crime Dropouts. Their relaxed hosting style and in-depth episodes are well worth a listen. Here is a sneak peek.
Hi guys, we're Mary and Vanessa, the hosts of True Crime Dropouts.
Join two best friends and former criminal justice majors as they pretend to know all things true crime.
So sit down, grab a broom, drive, we really don't care, and give us a listen. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and anywhere really.
And don't forget, stay in school, or you'll end up like us, degreeless without that fabulous FBI job.
Now, let's head to the episode. Stoke-on-Trent is a city which sits almost halfway between the city of Manchester in the north and the city of Birmingham to the south. Stoke has an important role in the manufacturing industry within the UK. The area became known as the Potteries, due to the fact that at one time it was the largest producer of pottery in the world, and was home to manufacturers including Royal Doulton and Wedgwood. Given its prime location, coaching inns were constructed along the routes connecting the three cities, including the Dalston pub, which was built in the 1800s to provide bed and board for weary travellers and their horses. As the city changed, with trains and canals being a quicker and more cost-effective mode of transporting goods, the pub took on a different type of customer. Gone was the traveller and his horse, replaced by local miners, steel workers and potters, who frequented the pub after a long day at work. And although the professions may have changed, the pub was still a popular spot for locals until its sudden closure in 2018, when it closed its doors for good. Today the once thriving pub sits abandoned in the middle of a roundabout on the A34. Silver shutters seal the doors and windows, locking the memories of hundreds of years inside, echoes of laughter and disagreements, final goodbyes and first dates. It was in the walls of the Dalston pub that a relationship blossomed when Lee Knight set his eyes on Kate, a 19-year-old barmaid. Lee recalled their first interactions, quote, "She was nice looking. Every time I went into the pub, I made sure I spoke to Kate." As much as he wanted to take her on a date, he knew Kate had a boyfriend, so he had to settle with liking her from afar. He had admired the bubbly 19-year-old, enchanted with her vibrant personality as she chatted and smiled with her patrons. One day, upon learning that Kate was newly single, Lee finished his pint and plucked up the courage to ask the beautiful and confident barmaid on a date. His stomach knotted with nerves as he approached her. He took a deep breath and stepped up to the bar. His hand shaking by his side, he felt his words get stuck in his throat as her chestnut eyes met his. Somehow he managed to speak, trying to appear confident, but in his mind he was convinced Kate would say no. But she said yes, and with that the tension dissipated and Lee smiled. The first date became the second, and then the third, until the couple lost count. Lee described their relationship as, quote, "She was outgoing, she liked things I liked the same music, liked to go the same places. She was very, I suppose you'd call it, bubbly. We always laughed when we were together." Kate had aspirations to better herself and her circumstances. While she and Lee were dating, she attended night school to study bookkeeping and was motivated by the dream of having a comfortable house in an upmarket area, with a nice car and nice things. 3 years after the couple had first met, they had gotten engaged and were planning the perfect wedding, when they discovered that Kate was pregnant, so all their plans were changed. With the nuptials moved forwards, the pair tied the knot on the 4th of April, 1998. Anxiously the groom stood as he waited for the music, which would announce the arrival of his bride. His blue eyes glistened with tears as he observed her every step down the aisle. Kate wore a long, pale blue dress with a white overcoat. Her dark brown hair in a simple half-up, half-down style that fell about her shoulders, framing her high cheekbones, which were enhanced by understated makeup. The ceremony seemed to pass in a blink of an eye, as the couple exchanged the traditional vows of promising to be there for each other, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Lee recalled the day, quote, "We were both very excited. We had the wedding at the registry office in Hanley, but it was a brilliant day." Following the wedding, the newly married Mr. and Mrs. Knight moved into a small 2-bedroom terraced house in Stoke-on-Trent, where they settled down and hoped to turn it into a family home. Kate grew increasingly unhappy in the cramped house. She wanted something bigger, with a garden in a nicer area. Lee's mother, Annette, remembered Kate stating, quote, "She always said she didn't want to live in a terraced house. It was like, no, we want to go live in the country, which you know everybody does, don't you? Oh, we've got this now, and when we move again, we want to move on to something better." End quote. Upon the arrival of their son Jack, Lee was determined to provide for his family and give Kate the house she desired. Lee would often work overtime, sometimes doing 7 days straight. Andrew Brindle, Lee's colleague, recalled how well-respected and popular the hard-working father of one was. Quote, "Lee was the kind of person who you could rely on. He would never let you down." Lee spoke regarding his motivation for working the long hours, quote, "I was happy to work 50 to 55 hours a week, to support my wife and son, keep the house that we'd got and the cars. We never really had a lot of money, but if we needed anything, we always had enough money to buy anything." Kate's dreams of a better home came true when Lee was promoted to a management position at the JCB factory. Working as a team leader with his new role, he also received a pay rise, earning £500 a week, which allowed them to move into a 3-bedroom semi-detached house on a newly built estate in Muir Hay, with the space and garden Kate had wished for, in a more desirable part of Stoke. Lee reflected on the new £125,000 house, quote, "It was brilliant. It just felt better. It was a new house, only about 3 years old. It was a nice neighbourhood, nice people were living around us." But like with many marriages, good times can be soured by the bad, and not long after moving into their new home, Kate suffered a devastating miscarriage. Lee reflected on this devastating time, quote, "Not long after we moved in, Kate became pregnant again, but after about 6 weeks she said she'd had a miscarriage, and I think that brought us closer. After that we bought a puppy. We used to take him out for walks a lot, all 3 of us together, and I thought it was just normal life. That's how things go." Now in a comfortable home with Lee in a steady job and being blessed with their son Jack, the couple looked forward to April 4th, 2005, when they were celebrating their 7th wedding anniversary. Because Lee had to work that day, the couple had agreed to have a candlelit meal at home, with red wine and food from their favourite takeaway, just the 2 of them. Lee recalled that, quote, "I've been looking forward to it all day. I think I finished work early that night to get home." Returning home from work that night, he was greeted by the scent of his favourite curry, and his wife was dressed in a brand new outfit, with her hair and makeup done, and the dining room lit by the soft glow of candlelight. Sharing a bottle of red wine, they talked and reminisced for hours. As the candles grew lower and the flames flickered softly, it was a perfect night. On the morning of the 5th of April 2005, Lee got up to prepare for work. Still feeling the effects of the wine he had drunk the night before, he felt nauseous and had been up part of the night vomiting. But despite feeling under the weather, he shrugged it off as being self-inflicted, and besides, dedicated to his job, he wouldn't fall in sick because of a hangover. So having kissed Kate and Jack goodbye, he set off for work, with a pained feeling stirring in his stomach and a dull throbbing headache. By the time he returned home that night, he was feeling worse. His abdominal pains had increased. He suffered from waves of tingling and numbness in his extremities. His heart raced, and his muscles involuntarily flexed and relaxed. Lee still appeared to be intoxicated. He staggered as he walked, and his speech seemed slurred and incoherent. His eyes seemed to be affected by some sort of weakness, leaving him unable to maintain his gaze. Feeling lethargic, his limbs growing heavy, Lee considered he may be coming down with the flu, and that he was feeling the effects more because he hadn't slept properly the night before. Therefore he went to bed early, hoping he would feel better in the morning. Waking the next day, Lee still had a dull headache. He found he was suffering from rapid but laboured breathing, as though he was struggling to fill his lungs. Taking some paracetamol, the devoted husband and father went to work. By the morning of the following day, Lee, for the first time in 2 years, placed a call to his employer to advise that he was too sick to come to work. His abdominal pain had increased, and he was now feeling aches in other parts of his body, including his back, ribcage and pelvis. After being ill for 5 days, Lee's condition was growing increasingly concerning. He explained, quote, "I had really bad stomach pains, kept being sick, and everything that I had to drink, I was sick again. And I said, I need to see a doctor. My stomach's really hurting." Seeing her ailing husband and the pain he was in, Kate called for an ambulance, which rushed him to the University Hospital, North Staffordshire. Having been assessed, the doctors learned that as well as him struggling to breathe, being unable to control his movements, Lee hadn't urinated for several days, which the medical professionals saw as evidence of issues with the kidneys. He was placed on dialysis, which takes over the functions of cleaning out waste products in the blood, which is normally performed by the kidneys. Mystified by Lee's illness, tests were carried out straight away. The results showed that Lee had hypocalcemia, which is defined as a patient suffering from low calcium levels. They discovered that his urine contained high levels of calcium oxalate crystals, which suggested the possible presence of kidney stones, which form when too many oxalates are in the patient's system. Some of Lee's symptoms were consistent with him having kidney stones, particularly the pain in his stomach and groin and the sickness. He was taken for a CT scan to check for the presence of stones, but none were detected. Doctors were mystified by the cause of Lee's illness. His tests had come back showing a high level of potassium in his blood. Normal levels are important, according to kidneyfund.org. Quote, "Potassium is a mineral and an electrolyte. It helps your muscles work, including the muscles to control your heartbeat and breathing. Potassium comes from the food you eat. The extra potassium that your body does not need is removed from your blood by your kidneys. When you have kidney disease, your kidneys cannot remove extra potassium in the right way, and too much potassium can stay in your blood. When you have too much potassium in your blood, it is called high potassium or hyperkalemia. Having too much potassium in your blood can be dangerous. High potassium can even cause a heart attack or death." End quote. Doctors also discovered that Lee had low levels of magnesium in his system, which explained the issues the patient was suffering, from his fits to the lack of energy and muscle strength. If left undiagnosed, the lack of magnesium can cause a loss of emotion, an altered mental state, and can result in the patient slipping into a coma, or being at risk of having a heart attack or stroke. Due to Lee demonstrating the more severe symptoms of low magnesium, he was placed on an IV, which they hoped would increase his levels. But their main concern was that the magnesium deficiency had been caused by a more serious issue, as Lee's kidneys were failing, and the doctors could not identify the cause. Lee remembers being in hospital in those early days, quote, "I didn't really know what was going on. It was just things happening around me, so it was really scary." As his condition continued to deteriorate, Lee was beginning to experience facial paralysis, sight loss, and hearing loss. 4 days after he had been admitted, he had taken a turn for the worse. He recalled, quote, "I could remember looking down and there was blood everywhere. Loads and loads of blood. And I don't know if I shouted something. The next thing I knew, it was 4 months later." The bleeding had been caused by a duodenal ulcer, which according to the London Clinic, quote, "is an open sore that occurs when the protective mucous lining the wall of the intestines breaks down. Bacteria, stomach acid, and digestive enzymes can then damage the wall itself. A ruptured duodenal ulcer is a medical emergency and will require surgery." End quote. Having been given this news, Annette recalled that she was so upset at the time. The room suddenly became a hive of activity, with nurses rushing about, prepping her son for surgery. She admitted that she became so overwhelmed that she fainted. As Lee was rushed into surgery, Annette was advised by a doctor that, quote, if they operated, there would only be a 60% chance of him surviving, because he was losing so much blood. Without operating, he'd die anyway. So they sent for his family. The surgeon struggled to stem the flow of blood. Lee had blood transfusions, and after fighting to save Lee's life, they discovered the bleeding was being caused by the ulcer, which they swiftly cauterized. Following the operation, Lee was placed on the intensive care unit. He had fallen into a coma, his illness still unknown. Annette described, quote, "I felt as if my world had fallen apart. I just couldn't take it in that he could go, I willed him back, I really willed him back. I talked to him constant. I rubbed his arms, I talked to him, I sang to him. I wouldn't let him go, not if I could help it. He wasn't going to leave me." For weeks his family sat at the 37-year-old's bedside, telling him about his little boy Jack and all the things he had been up to. All they could do was talk and pray that Lee would respond to them, with a move of his hand or the opening of his eyes. But for 10 weeks Lee lingered in a comatose state. His body had been ravaged by his illness. Lee's brain and nervous system had been damaged, as had his kidneys. His mum remained at his bedside, holding onto his hand. "Boys at work are asking after you," she told him softly. A sorrowful smile lit her face for a moment. Lee loved his job, and his work colleagues loved him. Her strength had waned as the weeks had passed by. The longer Lee remained in the coma, the less his chances of recovery were. In an attempt to identify the cause of his illness, a biopsy was performed on the kidneys. The only abnormality they found was the presence of 3 tiny calcium oxalate crystals. One doctor suggested that this could be evidence of ethylene glycol, which is a byproduct of antifreeze when ingested. However, almost 100% of cases are through self-harm or accidental consumption, so this was ruled out as a possibility. A breakthrough would come via Lee's cousin, who whilst out shopping had bumped into a friend of Kate's called Sarah Johnston. The pair stopped for a conversation, during which Sarah inquired about Lee, as she hadn't seen him for a while. The cousin informed Sarah that Lee was currently in a coma due to a mystifying illness. What Kate's friend then disclosed would shine a light on the cause of Lee's unexplained sickness. Alarmed, the cousin passed this information on to Lee's mum, who stated, quote, "I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When my niece told me, I thought, what do I do? I supposed if it wasn't true, and I go and tell everybody, what's it going to cause? The biggest row anybody could have in a family. I thought she couldn't. No way could she have done this. But we rang the hospital, and they said to come up straight away, which we did. And the doctor took us to a room with a sister. I said, could this be what was wrong with Lee? And he stood up and he said, my advice to you is to go to the police and go now. And he never said nothing else. He walked out of the room. Upon notifying the police, officers headed to the Knight's family home on Waterdale Grove, where they advised Kate Knight that she was under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder. The 29-year-old mother of one was stunned by the allegations that she had harmed her husband, and vehemently denied it. But soon the truth would be exposed. While Kate was being held for questioning, her home was searched. In a wardrobe in the master bedroom, forensic officers found a number of handbags, containing various documents related to loans and payment arrears, all bearing Lee's signature. When asked about these items, Kate stated that Lee was responsible for the family's finances, and she was unaware that there was any financial issues. When confronted about computer searches that had been performed on her desktop, Kate advised that she was so concerned about Lee's condition, she was looking for anything that could have caused his illness, and these searches included the effects of various substances, from drugs to poisons. The problem was that these searches had been done prior to Lee falling ill, over a number of months. Kate had searched the effects of various substances, including ecstasy, liquid iron, and antifreeze. A search of the kitchen revealed a bottle of supermarket antifreeze, which was missing 160 millilitres of its contents, roughly a cupful. Experts state that just half a cup of antifreeze is potent enough to cause death. With the evidence of mounting deaths, witness statements, and the certainty that Lee had been poisoned with antifreeze, Kate was charged with the attempted murder of her husband. She appeared for a preliminary court hearing, at which she pleaded not guilty. With a court date set, Kate Knight was released on bail. Shortly after this, Annette learned that her daughter-in-law was planning to move 65 miles away to the Wirral. Annette recollected that, quote, "I had a phone call off a neighbour that she was emptying the house. I'm not a vicious person, but I was so angry and hurt. I called a taxi and went across. Well, I was horrible. I was the most horriblest person. I shouted, I called her, I swore at her. If I'd have had it in me, I would have killed her. For taking my son's furniture, emptying his home, what he'd worked for." Annette's anger was completely understandable. Her son was lying in a coma because of Kate's actions, and he may never regain consciousness. Kate had already taken so much from Lee, and now she was taking his belongings and his son away from him. Any mother in Annette's position would have done the exact same thing. Annette couldn't help wondering if she had missed the warning signs, as she recalled her first impression of Kate, who had confidently walked into the kitchen, her dark brown curls bouncing about her shoulders. Annette was stood at the sink washing the dishes, when to her surprise, the guest began to root through the kitchen cupboards, rifling through the tins and packets, before turning to her host and saying, "What's for tea?" Annette did not know what to say to this forward young lady she had just met. But as she got to know Kate more, she noted that her son's new girlfriend, quote, liked the last say in everything, and very domineering. Lee's determination to provide for his family was undermined by Kate's habit of living beyond her means. Annette stated, quote, "It was a bit easy come, easy go. You know, furniture you don't look after it. Oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter. You can have another one. This is fine if you've got money." Annette also recalled Kate's waning willingness to work. She'd start a job, she'd be there 2 to 3 weeks, and she'd come out with, "Oh, they're making me manager." Well, you know nobody makes a person a manager when they've only been there 3 weeks. She'd only last 3 months at the most, any job, and then she'd finish, or be finished, we don't know, end quote. In most UK companies, there is a 3-month probation period for new employees, at the end of which their performance is reviewed, and if the employer is unhappy with the individual's work, they may be let go from the job. So it is possible that Kate was not getting past her probationary period. Describing Kate as a fantasist, Annette stated, quote, "You didn't believe anything that she said. If you saw it, you still didn't believe it. You know, she was just a liar, fantasizing." Kate's deceitful nature began to come to light during the police investigation, starting with her studies for bookkeeping, which she claimed she excelled in her exams, and this was proven to be false. Increasingly work-shy Kate claimed that she had fallen off a chair and was no longer able to work, but other people she spoke to were advised that she was working from home as a bereavement counsellor. This included Lee, who stated, quote, "She said she was working for a company called Vavcom, but I found out that there was no such company, and she hadn't worked for 3 years. It's not nice being lied to, especially by your own wife." While Lee was working hard to provide for his family, Kate was responsible for managing the family's finances. But she was driven to acquiring more money, and was spending more than Lee was earning. Kate lied to Lee about the amount of cash she would have on her person, telling him that she was working cash in hand at a call centre. Prior to this, Lee had been giving her the money to pay for the household bills, food, and anything else the family needed. However, after Kate told him about the call centre job, she advised that she would be able to cover the bills with her wages. Lee's wife also deceived him regarding the post, which she claimed needed to be collected direct from the sorting office, as they had issues receiving mail at their home address. This was just another ploy to prevent Lee from knowing the true extent of the couple's financial situation. Unbeknownst to Lee, Kate was committing fraud by forging his signature on documents, including an application for the extension on the mortgage. It would transpire that Kate had taken out loans just to pay off other loans, and she seemed to have gotten into a vicious cycle. She also faked his signature on other loans, and at no point did the mortgage or loan companies see or speak to Lee. Kate hid the paperwork for the various loans in places she knew Lee wouldn't look, including her numerous handbags. Overwhelmed by the mounting debt, Kate came up with a plan that involved a payment she would receive from JCB in the event of Lee's death. Prior to the trial, as Annette continued her bedside vigil, clinging to those last ounces of hope that her son would regain consciousness, after over 70 days, waiting, talking, sobbing and silently holding her son's hand, she felt his fingers twitch, just slightly at first. Then they slowly wrapped around hers in a weakened grip. Over the following days, Lee's strength began to return. He recalled his feelings. I wake up to find out that my wife had tried to kill me. I must have been able to hear what people were saying. When I woke up, the first thing I said, apparently, was I asked my mum if Kate had done this to me. That was the first time I was aware of it, really. Then people gradually told me what was happening. I was gutted. I was devastated. It still upsets me now. Annette was overjoyed on him regaining consciousness, quote, "It was really like a happy day. He wasn't out of the woods by all means, but he wasn't in intensive care, and he wasn't on the critical list. The nurses cheered, the doctors cheered, 'cause they never thought he would have gone out of that ward, not alive anyway." The case, however, would be difficult to prove in court, with no eyewitnesses and nothing that conclusively pointed to Kate as the perpetrator, including lack of proof that antifreeze was responsible. Toxicologist Robert Forrest highlighted the issues this would have caused the prosecution, in proving that Lee had been poisoned, as normally the kidneys of someone who dies from ethylene glycol poisoning would show the presence of dozens of crystals. Under the microscope, it would appear like the pattern on a red and white granite kitchen counter. Unfortunately, in Lee's case, when he was placed on dialysis, it flushed out the crystals from the organ, meaning there was not enough there to conclusively prove that Lee had been poisoned. The computer searches performed by Kate and the witness statements would be vital to the prosecution, particularly the testimony of Kate's friend and confidant, Sarah Johnston. Having lived 3 doors away from the Knights, Sarah often spent time visiting Kate. She advised the court that she first became aware of her friend's thoughts of killing Lee when Kate had asked Sarah if she knew a hitman. Sarah recalled that Kate claimed it was for a friend, who was willing to pay £50,000 if they could be put in touch with someone who could do the job. Taken aback by this request, Sarah insisted she was not the kind of person to be associated with a hitman. She told the court that she shrugged it off as she thought Kate was fantasizing. On another occasion, she remembered visiting a chemist with her friend, and while there, Kate spoke to the chemist regarding liquid iron. The chemist, Andrew Pickard, testified at the trial, quote, "During the conversation that I had with Kate, the concern I had with this was making sure that the person it's for knew exactly what dose to take. Obviously, in overdosage can prove poisonous." Kate did not provide a clear idea of who the medication was going to be for, claiming it was for herself at first, then changing to them being for her grandmother, who was having difficulty swallowing her iron tablets. At this point, Sarah became concerned as Kate's nan had passed away. Upon leaving the chemist, Sarah confronted Kate on this lie. The conversation with Kate unnerved Sarah. Kate told Sarah that, with Lee dead, she and her son would be financially secure and happy. This forced Sarah to wonder if her friend was really capable of murder. Kate would reject the idea of using liquid iron, realizing that it was difficult to disguise the taste and odour. Sarah continued her testimony to the court, advising that on the 5th of April 2005, she had joined Kate at her home for a coffee and a chat. While in the kitchen, Kate pulled out a bottle of antifreeze from under the sink, asking her friend to smell it. Sarah told her it had a powerful chemical scent. Kate then took a bottle of red wine, poured Sarah a small glass, and asked her friend to taste it. As she drew the wine to her mouth, she was struck by a slight smell of diesel, to which Kate proceeded to tell her that she had laced the wine with antifreeze. Upon reflection, Sarah cannot fathom why. She then took a sip of the wine, knowing that it had been contaminated. She claimed she felt coerced by Kate, who, when informed that it just tasted of wine, proceeded to explain that she had been researching the use of antifreeze and its effects online, with the intention of poisoning Lee's meal that night when they celebrated their wedding anniversary. Kate proceeded to admit to Sarah that the previous night she had mixed some antifreeze in her husband's food, to which he complained there was a strange metallic taste to it, but it didn't seem to bother him as he finished the meal. Sarah proceeded to tell the court that she had been unaware that Lee had been rushed to hospital. So when she next saw Kate, she was torn whether what she was being told was the truth or a lie. Kate had informed Sarah that her attempt to poison Lee had been successful, and that when a biopsy had been performed on Lee's kidney, there was no trace of the substance in Lee's system. Kate proceeded to state that if she hadn't called for an ambulance, Lee would be dead, to which she voiced her disappointment. Still unable to comprehend that Kate would be capable of murder, and unaware that Lee was fighting for his life in hospital, she shrugged this off as just Kate being a fantasist. She expressed her regret when she learned that Lee was in intensive care from his cousin. That was when she realised that Kate had been serious. Lee's mother took to the stand, and she testified on Kate's character, describing her as manipulative, greedy, and controlling. Annette then proceeded to explain the effects the defendant's actions had had on her son, especially when they learned that his hearing and sight loss may be permanent. Quote, absolutely gutted, because we kept hoping it'll come back. That's what we kept holding on to. And it'll come back. But when they said no, it definitely won't. Well, you think about him before yourself. How's he going to take it? But he took it on the chin. Prosecution highlighted the research Kate had done online to highlight the premeditation of her actions. The court heard that initially Kate had attempted to use ecstasy tablets. Having searched how fatal 8 pills could be, Kate learned that because each pill could contain between 10 to 150 milligrams, it is difficult to determine a fatal dose. This is further complicated by a number of other factors, including the purity of the drug, the user's tolerance to ecstasy, their weight and build, as well as the overall body fat, the health of the liver and the kidneys, and the age of the individual. Taking this into account, Kate acquired 10 ecstasy tablets and planned to dose Lee over a day while they were travelling to see her mum in Liverpool, and during the journey she slipped him 10 pills concealed in drinks. Lee had taken holiday time off work for a couple of days so they could make the 120-mile round trip. Feeling the effects of the tablets, he recalled asking Kate, quote, have you given me some drugs? I don't know what it was, I just felt ill, like really ill. She started to cry and said, why would I give you drugs? I wouldn't give you drugs. I love you. And she cried and cried. I thought I was just ill, but I couldn't sleep. He continued, and then it happened again. Kate had done me a Coca-Cola with my tea, and I got this ill feeling again. I was really sick. I was detached all the time. It was strange. People around me kept saying, you're not right, go home, you should have some time off. I thought it was just the flu, so I carried on as normal. During her 5 hours in the witness box, Kate Knight did not show a shred of remorse for what she had done to Lee. Her feelings towards her husband and father of her child were those of indifference. When asked to describe the days leading up to her husband being rushed to hospital, she shrugged and stated, I just thought he had the flu. She proceeded to state, quote, he went grey on the Saturday morning. He looked awful. Kate continued by claiming that Lee was a heavy drinker and that when he was admitted to hospital, she believed that his love of alcohol had been a factor. Her husband, however, vehemently denied this accusation. He was a social drinker who probably went out with his workmates 4 or 5 times a year. Lee argued, quote, I didn't really go out with my mates. We would usually go out 4 to 5 times a year at the most. Sometimes we'd go for a curry, but the women would come with us. Kate would be there. I used to have some kinds of lager in the house, but I was never dependent on it. I never had time off work for being drunk or anything like that. He admitted he may have a couple of cans of beer every so often at home, but he wasn't dependent on alcohol, and others corroborated that he was not a heavy drinker. Professor Robert Forrest was a toxicologist who provided expert testimony on the effects of ethylene glycol, which is commonly found in antifreeze. The professor advised, quote, "It is not the ethylene glycol itself that is poisonous. It is what it is converted into when in the body that is poisonous." He proceeded to explain that one of the acids it creates, when ingested, is oxalic acid, which he continued, quote, "when combined with calcium in the blood, forms calcium oxalate crystals, which are deposited in the kidney, in your brain, and other places like the lining of your gut." Robert continued to describe the effects. As the crystals build up in the body, they cause kidney failure, blindness, deafness, brain damage, and bleeding from the gut. Professor Robert Forrest finished his testimony, quote, "Ethylene glycol starts off its taste sweet. It's mildly intoxicating, so you feel as if you're drunk." The prosecution purposely kept Lee out of the courtroom, with the intention that when he came to testify, the jury would see exactly what Kate had done to him. As Lee took to the witness stand, his cochlear implants visible on either side of his head, his face still partially paralysed and his body weakened by his comatose state, the 37-year-old stood before the court, unable to see anything but shadows and silhouettes. To those present, he seemed to be a likeable, gentle giant. Lee advised the jury of the ongoing effects of the antifreeze, quote, "When I first woke up, I could see and hear, and I think it took a few weeks for my eyes and ears to stop working, and it was really scary. Nobody could communicate with me. They used to have to write it in block capitals on my hand. That was really hard to learn, that was. I used to cry a lot. The nurses on Ward 29 were brilliant with me. They used to come in and hold my hands to stop me being upset. Yeah, they were really good to me." He continued by talking about how devastated he was to learn that the loss of his senses was permanent, and the thought of not being able to see his son's face again, or watch him get married, filled him with great sadness. Countering Kate's claim that he managed the household finances, Lee insisted, quote, "I didn't know anything about any debt. Apparently, I found it since I came out of hospital, that she wasn't paying any of the household bills." Lee also countered Kate's claim that he had purchased the bottle of antifreeze in preparation for a trip to Wales, explaining to the court that he used to be a mechanic. If he needed anything, he would purchase it at trade prices, not from a supermarket. He emphatically stated, quote, "I don't know how it got there. I don't buy antifreeze from Tesco's." The jury of 10 women and 2 men retired for deliberations. It took them 2 hours to reach a guilty verdict. As the judge began summing up, Kate, who had been emotionless throughout proceedings, began rocking backwards and forwards, crying and shaking uncontrollably. The judge, Simon Tonking, called Kate's actions, quote, "premeditated planning of a most callous kind." He continued to explain the impact of her actions had on the life of her husband, a man who was devoted to her and her son, and had worked hard to take care of them, and in return for his dedication and love, she placed her love of money above the value of his life. The judge stated, quote, "The devastation you have brought to his life is apparent to everyone who saw him giving evidence in this case. But while he did so, there was little or any sign of remorse on your part." The judge was adamant that Kate's sentence should act as a deterrent, explaining that his decision was based on the premeditated nature of the crime, the fact she concealed the cause of Lee's illness from medical professionals who were fighting to save his life, and the complete lack of remorse or regret for her actions. Due to these factors, Judge Tonking sentenced Kate to 30 years, with a minimum sentence of 15 years in prison before she would be eligible for parole. Lee was absent from the sentencing hearing, but he described his feelings when he heard the news, quote, "I was ecstatic that she got 30 years. I expected her to get 10 years at the most, and when I heard that she got 30, I was really pleased. It keeps her out of mine and my son's life for a long time, hopefully, and lets him get used to things as they are now." Detective Constable Martin Smith, who led Staffordshire Police's inquiry into the attempted murders, said, "This highly unusual case posed a number of investigative challenges. Despite the weight of evidence against her, Kate Knight refused to cooperate throughout. Her cowardly crime almost caused the death of Lee Knight, whose blindness is a life sentence in itself. He will never be able to properly see his young son again. Lee, with the support of his family, is piecing his life back together. I hope today's outcome will help them on their road to recovery. Kate Knight cynically and ruthlessly plotted to murder her husband and cover her tracks. Even when Lee was critically ill, she kept secret from doctors what had caused the condition, which eventually left him blind, deaf, and in need of kidney dialysis. Despite her scheming, Kate left a trail of evidence, which through detailed investigation we are able to build into a strong case, resulting in her prison sentence today." End quote. Outside court, a Staffordshire police spokesman on behalf of Mr. Knight said in a statement, quote, "It was very confusing until I started having treatment. I have kidney dialysis 3 times a week, but I have lots of good friends who take me to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. My family have been really supportive. Kate has ruined my life, and what she did will have a big effect on Jack's future. It has been very stressful. I realised that my wife had left me. I lost my job, my house, everything I worked for, and worst of all, my son. I hardly have any independence anymore. I need to have somebody with me all the time. I don't think I'll ever be able to work again." He also recalled Kate visiting him in hospital, quote, "I was delirious in hospital, but I remember Kate kept bringing in bottles of flavoured water, and she would pour it for me. She had told my parents not to give me a drink because the nurses said I could only have a certain amount a day. Then she tried to tell the nurses she was in charge of giving me drinks while she was visiting. I have no doubt that stuff was doctored, and she was trying to finish me off right under the doctors' noses." When he was later interviewed by a national newspaper, he spoke about his relationship with Kate and the impact she'd had on his life. "I adored her and thought she loved me. I will never quite believe a woman I loved to bits, who was my soulmate, would try to murder me for a few lousy quid. She was willing to let me die a slow, lingering death so she could pay off her debts. What she did has really ended my life. I'm blind, deaf, and could relapse and die of kidney failure at any time." Even after being incarcerated, Kate showed little remorse for her actions, even sending letters to her friends, declaring how brilliant life is behind bars, and comparing it to a stay in a hotel, quote, "It's a canteen day, so everyone's quiet and munching sweets. It's a bit like Travelodge, minus the minibar and room service." Lee Knight has dealt with her betrayal with dignity, focusing not on her, but on building a positive future for his son. Prior to the trial, he was fitted with cochlear implants to allow him to hear again, and at some point he hopes to have further operations to restore his eyesight. In August 2008, Lee's younger brother Michael offered to donate his kidney in an act of unconditional love. Annette commented on her son's generosity, quote, "I am so proud of Michael. He's taken everything with a pinch of salt. He'll say to Lee, 'I'm going on holiday this weekend. I'm taking your kidney, if that's all right.' And Lee will say to him, 'Don't get drinking. Don't make a mess of my kidney.' And that's how we joke about it, as if they're just giving each other a birthday present. It's a gift of life. It is giving such a difference to Lee's life. But I am terrified." Following the successful transplant, Lee's life took another positive turn. Upon leaving hospital, he asked Jackie Evans out on a date. The pair had formed a special bond during his treatment. She had been his dialysis nurse. With Lee requiring 3 rounds of treatment a day, they spent hours each week together. Having lost his ability to see and hear, the pair communicated by her spelling out words on his palm with her finger. In an interview with the Sunday Mirror, Lee reflected on the blossoming relationship, quote, "Jackie made great efforts to talk to me by writing words with her finger over my hand. I knew then that she was a special lady. I was on dialysis for 4 hours, 3 days a week, and even when she was working in another part of the dialysis unit, Jackie always found time to come and check on how I was doing. When I left hospital, I invited Jackie out for a Chinese meal as a thank you for all the things she had done for me, and our romance took off from there. After what has happened to me, I never thought I would ever find love again. I really feel I'm getting my life back, and I'm so thrilled that Jackie will be sharing it with me. I'm a very lucky man. I'm lucky to be alive, and I'm lucky to have Jackie. Our true love is our bond and our strength. Lee and Jackie got engaged at a holiday caravan in Wales, and the couple got married at Newcastle-under-Lyme Registry Office. The couple's children, Jackie's 2 sons from a previous relationship, and Lee's son, Jack, acted as best men. His new wife spoke of her admiration for Lee, quote, "Lee has been incredibly brave throughout all the years of surgery and treatment. His determination to survive and beat all the odds has been amazing, and I am so proud of him." His mother, Annette, described how Lee is coping with his new life. Don't get me wrong, he gets upset on occasions and he gets frustrated a lot. How anybody can take what he's been through, and being blind and deaf on top of it, is beyond me. I don't know how he's took it. He's took everything in his stride, and it takes one hell of a bloke to do that. I don't think there's many more that can do it, but you know, that's Lee. It is so refreshing to be able to cover a case with a happy ending. It fills me with joy to know that despite Kate's betrayal, Lee has been able to love and trust once more, and I sincerely hope that he is happy and focused on a positive future with Jackie and their children. Today's episode has fallen on my first wedding anniversary, and as a present, I would love to hear your thoughts on the show. Please take a couple of moments to review the show on iTunes or any other podcasting app. And don't forget, you can support the show by spreading the word to your friends and family, joining the show on Twitter and Facebook, or becoming a Patreon member for just $1 a month. Because without the support of my lovely Northerners, this show would not be possible. Finally, thank you so much for joining me for episode 39 of It's Murder Up North. Episode 40 will be available next week. So in the meantime, keep an eye on those shadows.